Good afternoon. I am Evan Smith, Managing Director for Events at The Atlantic. I want to welcome you to South by Southwest and to this featured session with Paula Kerger, President and CEO of PBS, the public broadcasting service, the nation's largest non-commercial media organization. She has had that job for 20 years. In fact, her 20th anniversary was this past Friday. That's longer than anyone in PBS history, though I suspect the last year probably felt even longer than that. On her watch, PBS has transformed from a mere broadcaster to a multi-platform digital media org that delivers on its essential mission of education, inspiration, and service to the American public. Each year, 67% of U.S. households watch PBS. Each month, PBS reaches more than 42 million adults on linear primetime TV, more than 15 million users on PBS-owned streaming platforms, and 56 million people view PBS content on social media. PBS programs consistently win the most prestigious awards, including Peabodys and Emmys. Most important, in an era when trust in the media is at an all-time low, PBS is our most trusted institution. Ahead of NPR, streamers, newspapers, and commercial cable TV, and way ahead of the federal government and Congress, which of course defunded public broadcasting. Psych. Previously, Paula was Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of the Educational Broadcasting Corporation, the parent company of two New York PBS stations, WNET and WLIW. A native of Maryland, she's a graduate of the University of Baltimore. Please join me in welcoming the CEO of PBS, Paula Kerger. Thank you for being here. Good. Paula, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Evan. It's always great to be with you.
And great to have you in Austin. Before we begin, we talked about this yesterday.
Yeah. Are these all your disclaimers?
I have to disclose a few things. First of all, I was chair of the Austin PBS board about 25 years ago, served on the national PBS board while you were CEO.
Yes, you did.
For 8 years. Mm-hmm. I host an interview show that airs on PBS stations around the country, has for about 23 years, and I'm on the advisory board of the Public Media Bridge Fund, which is raising millions to support at-risk PBS stations. Other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, this is going to be a serious conversation.
It will be a serious conversation. You always ask hard questions, and I can't think of anyone who actually knows more about us than you.
Well,
actually, when you were on the board, particularly towards the end, it was during COVID, and your term was supposed to end, and I kept saying, "I'll just stay a little longer, a little longer." He started to refer to our board as the Hotel California of boards. And we did eventually, yeah, and you really haven't.
Eventually I left, but I guess I didn't leave.
Yeah, but you didn't really.
So I'm going to ask you all the hard questions today, and I'm going to begin with this. Why do you hate America? That's the, I mean, you understand, this is the assumption and the implication behind the zeroing out of public broadcasting funding.
Well, actually, that's not such a crazy question, because one of the strangest experiences of this last year, and you're right, this last year has felt like it has lasted for about 20 years. But it was in March of last year that I testified in front of the DOJ committee, which was Marjorie Taylor Greene's committee, and the name that was given to that hearing is Un-American Airwaves, holding the CEOs of PBS and NPR to account.
So they've said the quiet part out loud, or the loud part out loud, right? They think you're un-American for the way that you do your jobs and for the values of your organizations.
We are the most American of organizations. People don't understand what we are. And I think part of it is because of our funding, and part of it is also because our offices happen to be, actually we're in Arlington, we're across the river from Washington. But I think there's the assumption that we are somehow either state TV or that we are somehow a network like all the other networks. We're actually kind of like a co-op. All of our stations across the country are all independent. They're locally owned, they're locally operated, they're locally governed. And so most of our programming comes to us up through our stations. everything. Our board, Evan was on it because he was a former board chair. Another shout out to Austin. Our current board chair is Catherine Robb, who was also the former board chair of Austin PBS. So I think if you're the board chair of Austin PBS, then you become the board chair of PBS.
It's a path to be on the PBS board.
But I think the important thing to understand is we are very much of the people. We are the most democratic of organizations.
In fact, my frustration, to be candid with you, as a board member of PBS, was that you did not have more of an ability to direct or to work hand in glove with the local stations in terms of coordinating the efforts of those stations. I couldn't understand how PBS was effectively this network of stations, but the stations all operated so independently that PBS headquarters did not really have any ability to compel behavior, right? And that's a good thing. It's a federation of independent republics.
But that's the beauty of it.
That's the beauty of it.
That's the beauty of it. So we do for our stations what individuals can't do by themselves. So we put our broadcast schedule together. We maintain all the interconnection. It used to be satellite principally. Now it's principally digital. We build the websites. We create everything that is needed for stations to be in this environment. We also manage the negotiations on places like YouTube TV, where all of our stations are now carried. So if you get cable, you watch us. You get YouTube TV. The other multi-platforms we do for them. Each individual station couldn't do it by themselves, but ultimately, what that station does, how it functions in a community, what it puts on the air, is all the decisions that are made by them. And I think that, again, this keeps us very anchored in communities, and it's why we are so trusted.
Yeah, I'll note here an analogy to politics. You know, we talk all the time in a state like Texas about how local control used to be a core principle of conservative government. You know, the old Jeffersonian idea that the best government is closest to those being governed. And that's been inverted in a lot of places. You know, the reality is every individual station doing its own thing is how this should go.
Yeah.
How it's designed to be. People live in communities because they align their choice with the values of that community, so they want a station that reflects those values, reflects their tastes, and reflects their program.
And their needs. Right. You know, so if you are living in a community amongst other people, you really understand at a profound level what is needed there. Some of our stations are very deeply engaged in education. Some of our stations really become city squares, particularly around important issues that require debate. This is something that we seem to have lost an ability to do in this country, is to bring people together of different opinions and really come to agreement on how we move forward. And I think when you look at the rest of the media landscape, where there's been so much consolidation, and I've spent 20 years traveling the country. I've been to every state. I've been to almost every station. And what I see is that this is, in fact, what defines us, is that our stations are run by people in the communities. They stand in the grocery line alongside neighbors, and they hear what people like and they don't like, and what they wish the station would do more of, and so forth. And so we are very different than anyone else. I always say that we actually are a profound difference in the rest of media organizations. We just happen to use the same tools. And I think that is what has served us so well, because we rely on contributions from viewers like you. And in fact, in the last year, people realize now what that means. But we are asking people to give money for something they get for free. And people will only give to organizations that they care about, that they feel is adding value to them, to their families, to their communities.
The fact that people are willing to step up when they can get it for free is in some ways, in fact, in every way, it's the proof of concept.
Correct.
Right, it's the proof point. So I want you to rebut directly, before we ask you to make the affirmative case for why PBS is something that we as a country should be standing behind. I want you to rebut the negative case. So you mentioned the hearing in March, and then on May 1st of last year, the president's executive order came out. And here are some of the things that the president's executive order said. First of all, government funding of news media is corrosive to the appearance of journalistic independence. The president said Americans have the right to expect that if their tax dollars fund public broadcasting at all, they fund only fair, accurate, unbiased, nonpartisan news coverage. And then neither PBS nor NPR presents a fair, accurate, or unbiased portrayal of current events to tax-paying citizens. That's the president's case against you. Rebut that case.
Well, I mean, we are very much focused on providing facts. And in fact, if you look at, we do a number of programs that are focused on news, but the two principal programs that we produce are NewsHour and Frontline. And I would say that the whole premise behind how the NewsHour itself was created is to give you the facts, you make up your own mind. We are very careful not to conflate point of view and opinion with news. And I think that if you look at, which I do very carefully, the feedback that we get from viewers, sometimes I wonder if they're watching the same broadcast actually, because I hear from people that think that we have tipped too far one side or to the other, we've been too tough on the president, we haven't been tough enough, why did you have this guest, I don't want to hear what he has to say. That is in fact the whole point. This is what I said a few minutes ago. I think that our country suffers deeply from the way that we have tried to define how we share information, and particularly how we share information around the most important issues. And we set it up as if it's a pitched fight, and that someone has to win and someone has to lose. And for us, I think that the important contribution that we make is to make sure that people do have the facts. I mean, what happened over this past weekend with the comments from Brendan Carr, the head of the FCC, that has basically taken news organizations to task for the fact that we actually are reporting on the war in Iran, is really shocking to me and should be shocking to every person sitting in this room. If we are engaged in a war, we need to understand what is going on. We need to understand the facts and not what is being fed in terms of PR around it. That is our job.
Right. I want to come back to the FCC chair's comments in a second as an emblem of everything we're talking about, but stay with me on this idea that the NewsHour and other public affairs programming on PBS by design doesn't simply present the view that everybody who watches it wants to hear. You know, we live the last number of years in the United States of confirmation bias, right? You can find a news organization that will reaffirm the voices already in your head so that you are not obligated to listen to things you disagree with. And it seems to me that the best example of a show that does not do that is the NewsHour. Right. Liberals think it's too conservative, conservatives think it's too liberal, and that's probably a good thing.
It's absolutely a good thing. I mean, I think that it is, again, incredibly important that, and I think, you know, this is why public media exists in part, because part of what has driven other news organizations to, I think, be driven into one camp or the other is frankly audience and money. Because if you create an environment where you have everything sort of whipped up, people will come to it and they'll come back to it and come back to it. Our goal is, I don't want to say our goal is to be boring, because it's not, but our goal really is to try to at least give you the important information around those things that really make a true difference in our country. Right.
So again, the content that you all produce on, and let's be clear, you said we do some amount of news. Isn't it only about 10% of what airs on PBS is actually news?
Correct.
Right?
It's about 10%.
So it's not even that much. We'll come to the differences between PBS and NPR as it relates to that in a while, but just so we're clear, it's only about 10%. Fair, you're fair in your mind. You can defend fair, you can defend accurate, and you can defend unbiased. No hesitation.
No hesitation.
Yeah. The president really has had...
And by the way, let me just pause on that for a second. We have an ombudsman. We've always had a public editor. I mean, so we do take this seriously because everybody makes mistakes. You know, everybody should admit that we all make mistakes. We're human. And so we do take it really seriously. If we have messed up a story, if we have gotten our facts not exactly right, we have a journalist assigned to actually look at those circumstances. And if we've made a mistake, we very quickly publish or make public record of the correction. In fact, one thing that Evan did not mention, because he's now done this twice for us, once he chaired it, is we do every 5 years a very deep dive on our editorial standards. We take it quite seriously, and we want to make sure, again, coming back to the trust, that we're just not assuming that we're doing good work. We're not assuming that all of those attributes that you just, ascribe to us, but that we're actually actively managing it on a day-to-day basis, and that we are constantly challenging the decisions that we make to ensure that we are the type of organization that we need to be.
So, as the cliche goes, misery loves company, right? Like everybody running a news organization these days is subject to these kinds of attacks to some degree or another. Saturday morning, the president on Truth Social shared an image that was titled, "President Trump is Reshaping the Media." And it cataloged what he and I guess his supporters believe are all of the wins over the last year. Layoffs at the Washington Post, exits of various journalists, Jim Acosta from CNN, Terry Moran from ABC, the pending sale of CNN, the pending cancellation of Stephen Colbert. But at the upper left corner, the first thing on the list of all of these victories, PBS defunded. You're living inside his head.
And it was under the banner, gone.
Gone.
So there have been a few interviews where he said, well, PBS, they're gone.
He just said the other day something to the effect of PBS and NPR have closed up, which is obviously false. They've not closed up.
No, we're still doing it.
You're still doing it, right? Yeah, right. I realize this puts you in the position of having to speculate, and now, again, speaking of being inside his head, what did you do to him? like what exactly is it that got PBS? I mean, I'm sure you've asked yourself this late at night. Why did PBS get on his radar screen, get on the radar screens of people in the administration? What was it that you did that made you a target?
Tell the truth. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what we did that put us...
Does he hate Nova? I mean, what is it?
Yeah. Well, I think he's got a problem with Big Bird, but I'm just not sure. Right. I honestly, I'm not trying to...
Have you had a conversation with anybody in the administration, kind of off camera, on the sidelines, in the green room, where they said to you, I know we're saying it's about ABC, but actually it's about D? Has anybody copped to what this is actually about?
No, I do think that, and again, there also is the confusion, and every media organization, I think, gets conflated together, and particularly PBS and NPR get conflated together. But the only thing that I can really assume is that it has to do with the work that we do on the news.
Right. So let's go to the Brendan Carr thing. I mean, this is extraordinary to me, but maybe shouldn't be surprised by anything these days. So what happened this weekend? Brendan Carr, the chair of the FCC, was responding to the president's complaints, or he was resharing the president's complaints about negative coverage of the war in Iran. And what he effectively said was, watch what you say or we'll come after you. Not the first time he's said a version of this. The specific quote on X on Saturday was this: broadcasters that are running hoaxes and news distortions, also known as the fake news, have a chance now to correct course before their license renewals come up. The law is clear. Broadcasters must operate in the public interest, and they will lose their licenses if they don't. Fact check that. Does he have the power, as the chair of the FCC, to remove the broadcast licenses of organizations that will not bend a knee before this administration?
No, I mean, and there is a renewal process, but it is, I can't even remember the last time that a license was removed, and it was for such egregious activity. It is not anything that he has described here. And I think the first round of stations that go up for license renewal, I think, is maybe 2 years out. It's done by...
It may, in fact, be after or just on the lip of him as in the president, being out of office in this term.
Yeah, and it is quite a cumbersome process. You can't just decide we're going to pull a license away and do it in that manner. Now, we've seen things happen in the last year that are different than what my assumption is in the way that things operate, but it is not... but what I will say about it is it has, when you make statements like that, it has a chilling effect, where it appears the statements that he's made over the last, and I'm talking about the chairman of the FCC, has had the biggest impact is in organizations that are contemplating mergers and or contemplating activity that would require approvals from the FCC.
Well, the economic
and they do have the opportunity to, put a thumb on the scale.
There they can have an impact.
Yeah.
The economic circumstances of the media business, largely not good circumstances, cause in organizations anxiety, fear,
correct,
what have you, that might cause them to pull back. This is what was described a year or more ago as anticipatory obedience. Really what it is capitulation nation, if you want to know the truth, where you have news organizations are capitulating to the whims and to the demands of people in power for fear of the consequences.
Right.
But the smaller entities, the ones you're referring to, that don't have the economic resources to either survive an attack or to fight back, might be inclined to pull back their coverage.
Or have big business interests, which
Right.
take precedent over what we're talking about. Now, I just want to be clear, we are not exempt from, efforts from the FCC. Actually, if you go back even before the Marjorie Taylor Greene hearing, the very first movement that showed that this administration was focused on us was an inquiry from the FCC around our corporate underwriting. And they then followed up with, in fact, the chairman said that if we were found to be running real commercials and we run underwriting spots and we have very clear guidelines. By the way, it was the FCC that, I think under Reagan, that actually modified what used to be just a blue card with white print, if you're old enough, you remember this, where after the end of a show, you'd see this card come up and it would say, "Thank you, Payne Weber." And that was the extent of how we acknowledged corporate sponsorship. But the Reagan administration thought that if we were given some support in terms of helping us bring in resources from other places, including corporate support, that they could give us a little bit more latitude. And so we developed what we now do with the FCC, working in partnership.
And so all these years later, when I'm watching Lydia Bastianich, I know that Cento Tomatoes supports this show, and as a consequence of that, thank you, Cento Tomatoes.
Yes.
Right? Nothing wrong with acknowledging their support.
Right.
Right.
So this inquiry that he has now started has consequence. So, we've had to provide...
But Paul, that's a tax issue, right? That's not a license issue.
No. There's a money attached to this because we have had to provide an enormous amount of information and bring in lawyers to help us fight back against this. So it's not like we're going to lose our license, but there is a distraction issue.
Sure.
And there's a cost issue here, and we're not a big corporation. Right. So when you're fighting these kind of battles, to your point about not being able to manage against these kinds of attacks, this has huge consequence.
Totally. What I'm saying simply is that where they're coming after you on that is this idea that somehow you're a non-commercial broadcaster if you're accepting advertising as opposed to sponsorship.
Correct.
That's
Correct.
where they think they can go at you through that door.
Correct.
So far, they've not been successful.
And
now they're coming at you through other doors.
Through other doors. But what I'm also suggesting is, because they're coming after us both for our national spots, but also local stations. And you just hope that a local station hasn't made a mistake.
Totally. So I want to pivot the conversation away from the attack broadly to some specific consequences of the defunding. You have seen around the country in the last, whatever it is, from May 1st to today, 10 months, stations at the local level that have had to make changes, significant changes to the way they operate as a consequence of defunding.
Right.
And Arkansas has been on everyone's minds. Arkansas,
Maybe not everyone.
well, but I mean, in the universe of PBS, Arkansas has been on everyone's minds because of a change in leadership and a change in status that at least has been proposed.
Yeah.
Can you talk about, because you were just dealing with this over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, I was
Can
just
you
there
talk
last
about what's been going on in Arkansas as an emblem of the consequences rolling downhill on?
Yeah, so I'm going to take 2 minutes and do something that you'll be cross with me on. I'm not going to directly answer your question because I want to get us to where we are now.
Sure.
So 2 things happened. You started to talk about it. You read the president's order on that was issued on May 1st. What that did is actually 2 things. One is the order said that no federal money can go to NPR, PBS, and no station can use any federal money to pay to PBS or NPR. So that's what the order, and we sued the administration, and we still don't have the read on that, but we have sued because, again, not just for this appropriation, but we would get money from NEA, NEH, National Science Foundation, other government agencies. So that is ongoing. It immediately triggered, out of the Department of Education, the elimination of Ready to Learn, which is a program that supported the development of our kids programming, and we could talk at great length about what has happened to kids content in this country. That basically gutted our ability to begin to develop new kids programs and to do the research, and it was immediate pens down. We actually were finishing a new series which we were able to cobble together the funding to launch this fall, but it has had enormous effects. And then in the summer, actually it was in July, when the House earlier in June, I think, and then the Senate in July then voted to defund us, which meant we had funds appropriated over the next 2 years for public broadcasting, and those funds were eliminated. Now, where does that money go? Most of it did not come to PBS and NPR. Most of that money went to fund our stations. And to quantify it, it was roughly about 15% of the funding that came into public broadcasting came in through that appropriation. But that's an aggregate number. So I used to, as you said in your very kind introductory remarks, I used to be the general manager of our stations in New York. For us, it was probably about 6 or 7% of our funding. We have a great station in Cookeville, Tennessee that serves Appalachia. It's about 50% of their funding. And so we've always fought really hard to hold on to that funding. Catherine's grandfather, LBJ, when he created and signed the Public Broadcasting Act, he felt that it was tremendously important that there be media organizations, not just in the big cities, but that across the country, particularly in small communities. And that's why the federal money was always tilted more towards those smaller stations, because it would enable them to have stations and they would have access to information and stations that would focus on their communities, as I've described before. So now that the money is gone, what has happened? So Evan mentioned a few minutes ago in the early remarks that he's on the Public Media Bridge Fund. I worked with a number of foundations, and actually Evan was one of the earlier people I called, and I said, we need to put some emergency money together to at least give those stations a glide path. Our funding in the past was 3-year advance appropriation. When Newt Gingrich tried to defund public broadcasting, a number of years ago, his idea was to create a glide path to zero, which was done over 3 years. We had 3 months. Stations were expecting those resources in their pockets, and suddenly they were gone. And so for the most vulnerable stations, for those that were reliant more than 25% on federal funding, we wanted to create a fund they could tap into that would help them close that gap, and that's what we did. But it has created a lot of conversations around the country, some very small stations in areas where there were multiple stations in the same market that there has been, and in the case of the few that have now left PBS, these are all stations that were run by universities. They were not allowed to raise their own money. This was the money that really helped fund them, and they decided that they would shutter. The communities were already being served by a public media station. Not great, but fine in terms of the public is being served. But it is...
To stop there, you would acknowledge that in a community where there are multiple stations serving that community, there's actually a benefit to efficiency?
Yes.
Like collaboration, coordination, whether it's an outright merger or not, there's been duplication of efforts in some places, and although you wouldn't have asked for this, that part of it maybe helps.
It may be okay. And again, this comes back to this whole idea of who we are. Our stations are all independent. PBS didn't form any of them. They formed PBS to do the things at scale that would benefit them all. And so, you know, if you were designing this from the beginning, you probably wouldn't exactly design it the way it is.
Yep.
So, and we always should be looking for efficiency. So I'm not arguing against that. But what is concerning is now there are other parts of the country that, are looking at their stations. So Penn State, this has been very public. Penn State has a station. It serves part of Pennsylvania uniquely, and the university wants to get rid of their station because they're losing the funding. They want to put the resources in something else.
It becomes a line item for them, right?
It does appear that our station in Philadelphia is going to merge, and that community will be served. But and the other thing that I want to say before jumping into Arkansas is the thing that has been extraordinary, to one of your earlier points, is that since the defunding, contributions from viewers like you have been really extraordinary. So this idea that we were going to just, curl into a fetal position and then just slink off into the sunset did not happen. People in communities actually now understand what viewers like you mean. It means us. And so if we want these stations, we just need to step up and make sure that those stations are strong. And that is what is happening across the country. It has been unbelievably great. And I will be honest with you, I was not surprised in those first weeks when people began to write checks and send their contributions in, but I thought it was like a natural disaster. You know, when the hurricane passes, and a lot of times when the floodwaters are still high, people will have already moved on to the next thing.
And the attention on the crisis moves on to something else too, right? Yeah.
Did not happen.
Did not happen.
Contributions have continued and to grow.
Can you just say before you come to Arkansas specifically, because I do think where you've gone with this is important, the amount of money in the aggregate that the TV side of public broadcasting was out as a consequence of defunding was what?
It was $200 million. And so
basically one missile in Iran on one day.
Yeah, maybe. And so, so it is not, it was $1.60 a person a year. So, less than what if you just bought a coffee downstairs at Starbucks. So, so I think just to try to, understand what we're really talking about. So people have stood up. It's been amazing. In December, we learned that our station in Arkansas had a meeting of their commission. Now, some of our stations, I'm sorry, you're going to have I'm not trying to overload you with information about how we're structured, but it helps to understand. A lot of our stations, like your station here, is a community organization. The people from the community are on the boards.
And they hold the license. Community licensee.
Some of our stations belong to universities. I just described Penn State. But some of our stations are owned by the state. And that goes back to when public television was created. A number of states, particularly in the South and in the West, areas that have big geographic parts of their state that are not well served by media, or frankly, in the time when public broadcasting was created, it was very difficult for states to ensure that education was also delivered across the state. And so if you were doing things like advanced placement English or any of those things, it was very hard to set those up in small communities. But if you had broadcast, you could do classrooms of the air. You could cover the entire state. So a number of states then acquired television licenses, and those became the PBS stations.
Despite the fact that it just strikes me as a journalist problematic, to say the least, to have the license for your station held by someone you're going to report on, cover, and sometimes be required to cover in a negative light. Like, you could see how trouble is coming.
You could. But we've been functioning for the station in Arkansas, this is their 60th year. And it actually has worked out pretty well until now. So in December, the commission which is appointed by the governor, voted to leave PBS. And they voted to leave PBS by June 30th.
By June 30th of this year.
Of this year. So up until then, from the time we were defunded in July until December, like every other part of the country, the contributions had gone straight up. People were stepping up. They felt this was really important. As soon as they announced that they were going to be separating from PBS, the contributions ended. And the argument is that there isn't enough money to pay for PBS, and they're going to focus instead on Arkansas, and that's what the service is going to be. So I went to the commission meeting on Thursday of last week, and just wanted to make sure that the commission itself understood that it's not just the programming. I wanted to make sure they understood everything that we offer, that they were going to have to replace, the apps that we've built for them, everything else. But I also just wanted to encourage them to talk to the public, which they had not done. A number of people from the public attended the meeting. There was more than 100 people there. And it was really, I will tell you, we all have moments in our life where we just are reminded that, we're actually on a good path. Yeah. And for me, listening to people talk about how important PBS has been for them, and it was everything from older people for whom this has been an important part of their life, to people that are homeschooling their kids, that really rely on the work that we do, both in broadcast as well as everything else that we're delivering, to a woman whose story was so powerful, talking about her 2 children that she is homeschooling because they have disability, and that for them, this is the center of their life. And so, I am hopeful. At the end of the meeting, they had a vote of the commission. We asked them to just pause for a period and just make sure that they get public comment. And frankly, I said, I will help you try to raise the money to ensure that PBS can stay in Arkansas. And hopefully, so if any of you want to make a contribution, just keep PBS in Arkansas, come and see me. And hopefully we'll be able to pull it together. What helped is 2 former first ladies, Gay White and Barbara Pryor, one Democrat and one Republican, and they both stood up and said, we are all in, we are forming Friends of Arkansas PBS, and we are going to ensure that PBS stays in Arkansas.
But look what you have to do. Look what you have to do, look what it takes to put a Band-Aid on Arkansas, and you got 49 other states. God knows how things are going to go. Obviously, every state is different. Not every state has got the same situation as Arkansas. But it just shows the enormity of the task in front of you.
But I think, I'll tell you, what for me was the biggest lesson out of all of this is that you just need to tell people what the situation is, and they're the ones that are stepping up. I want to make sure that the solution for Arkansas comes from within Arkansas, and the solution for everything should come within the states themselves and the people of those communities. That is how these stations were built. I'll tell you, I was always amazed when I traveled around the country and I talked to people that had been involved when their stations were put on the air. And some of them would tell me just crazy stories. So if you look at how PBS, by the way, started in Texas, started in Houston. Very first license went to University of Houston. And then when you sort of travel around and you look at how this all came together, you see a bunch of stations that came on the air in the early days. And then you see a whole group of stations that came on the air late 60s, early 70s. Where did they come from? A little show called Sesame Street. People were aware that this great series had been created and people wanted it for their kids. And do you know who put many of our public television stations on the air? Women. And so I think that, again, we sell ourselves short if we don't engage communities and have people across this country, if they care about what we're doing. Look, if they don't care, if they don't think we're relevant anymore, then fine, we should hang up our skates. I'm not arguing that we should do something if our time has come and gone. But I don't see anybody doing what we're doing. I don't see anyone thinking the way that we have been really wrestling over these last months of how we can build the next generation of kids' content based on what we have now. And so I do think that if we are in partnership with communities, it is not up to me. It is up to all of us to make sure that this is a robust system.
But isn't this the argument in some ways that the government is making now, and isn't this the argument that could be made to you, which is, okay, you've proven that the value of the content is what it is. It's only a couple $100 million. There are a lot of rich people in this country. Just go out to private philanthropy. You're only talking about replacing whatever it is, not that much, relatively speaking. There are rich people in all 50 states and every community. Just put your hand out and you'll be able to replace that money, and then you'll have the benefit of being untethered from whatever political wackadoos on either side are in office at any given time.
Well, I am going to say something provocative, because I have had people over the last month say, isn't there some billionaire that can solve your problem? Yeah. My answer always is, I don't think that's such a great idea. That hasn't worked out well in other places. I do think
Not in every place, for sure.
No. And I'm not knocking people that are really generous, because people are. But I think what makes us different, and the reason why I think that, and I'm not dismissing larger contributions either, but I think what, so if anyone's wishing, I say, I was going to write.
If you have a large contribution you want to make,
I was going to write her a big
it,
check,
right.
but I'm not going to now. What I'm suggesting is this, that the idea that our answer is simple and that there is a single person that is going to solve it is not a great idea. What has made us strong is we are a system of the people. Lots of small contributions and some slightly larger contributions all come together, and it makes it work. There is a time when people are really proud to walk around with PBS t-shirts, I've seen them everywhere now, or PBS mugs or tote bags or whatever, you can call them whatever you want. But I do think there is something about being part of this, everyone doing just that little bit, that makes a big difference.
Yeah.
So I do think that there is a huge argument to, trying to be self-sufficient and so forth. I do worry that we will lose some stations, and we will lose some stations in small communities that really deserve to have PBS stations.
And don't have any other news, right?
And that is what I worry about. And so I have not given up on getting federal money. I would hope that if we're able to get any money back, and could especially go to rural parts of the country that I think really deserve to have strong stations, and I think that's where we should put our energy.
So we're going to go to audience questions here after this. We'll have those up on screen here. We'll do those. People often conflate PBS and NPR. They think it's one entity. Even people who should know better think it's one entity. How is PBS with NPR at the moment? Like, do you all feel kindred, aligned? You've both been on the receiving end of these attacks, but you're different organizations. Talk about the relationship between the two.
Yeah, so NPR is, I know they do things like Tiny Desktop and so forth, but they're really a news organization. And that is really their focus. They're running, I don't run NewsHour, by the way, it's a separate production, same as with Frontline and so forth. And as you point out, it's about 10% of what we do is in the news space. But obviously, we have a lot of commonality between what we do, and we're both public media organizations, and we do share reporters from time to time. And so, I think that whatever affects one of us affects both.
This fight is being waged jointly, stronger together.
Absolutely.
Stronger together.
Yeah.
All right, let's do some audience questions. Which organizations or media models, Paula, are informing your plans for new revenue? Obviously, if this money is going to be replaced, it's going to require stations to think creatively and innovatively about new streams of revenue. So what are you basing the ideas on?
Yeah, I would say two things. One is we're looking at new revenue, but coming back to your earlier point about, multiple stations in a market, we're also focused on efficiencies, which frankly, I have been at PBS for the last few years because the whole media landscape has shifted. You have to act more efficiently. And I think in terms of business model, the other thing that we have done is that we also focus on partners. We don't deliver everything. Our entire content budget for the year for PBS, for both kids and for all of us, is less than a single season of Stranger Things. So we operate with a relatively small amount of money, which we leverage significantly. We look for producing partners, Over the years, people are very familiar with the work that we've done with, particularly on the dramas and, with our partners in Britain and so forth. But in the United States, part of the discussions that we've had with how we're leveraging money is the relationships we have with other media organizations, which, by the way, is what everyone else is doing. So our biggest streaming partner is with Amazon, but we've also worked with Netflix, and we're just looking for ways to make the dollars go further, but also to put our stuff in the places where people are looking for our content. I think the idea that we are the exclusive place for the work that people see is, people go to the places they go. What is more complicated for us is we're not only bringing the PBS content there, but we want to make sure our stations are represented there. So I think that's a piece of it. So, we're looking at ways that we can streamline expenses even further.
Yep.
We're looking at ways that we can make contributions easier so that if you're on one of the platforms and you want to support your local station, you can do it quickly. But we're trying to really anticipate. It's not that I've made the decision that the federal money is gone forever, but we have to be realistic and operate as if it's not there. So where does it come from?
I have to presume it's not coming back.
You have to presume, but hopeful that it will, because it'll enable us to do that much more.
So let's talk about what differentiates. Good question from the audience. What differentiates what you all provide from what the commercial broadcasters provide? You mentioned kids programming earlier, but I think the question is, if PBS were to suddenly go away en masse, what is it that you do that the commercial broadcasters could not or pick up themselves or are not doing a version of now?
Yeah. So actually, it's interesting. If you look back over the years, you see it time and time and time again where commercials will look at some of the things that we've done. And most people don't realize Pawn Stars came from Antiques Roadshow. They look at formats and things that we've done, and then they copy it and do it in their own way, or it looks very similar to what we've done. Whole networks, popped up, particularly in the cable days, that looked exactly like us. A lot of the early Discovery channels were really based on the idea they'd be the commercial version of PBS, and it works out okay in the beginning, but then the cost imperative is different. That's why I say we're in a different business. We're looking to serve the public, and so, that may mean that you're not doing all sharks all the time. You may focus on other things. And so I think right now the biggest vulnerability is around kids. So the streamers don't need kids content unless you're Disney. Most of the networks have given up their kids schedule. We can have an interesting conversation of what's educational or not. Most kids are now on YouTube. There are some good things on YouTube. I'm not dismissing YouTube, but there's also a lot of stuff that is really not for kids. Mr. Beast is the #1 show for very small children. I'm talking about 3 to 5-year-olds. That's not what that series was designed to do or be. And it is definitely a far reach away from, Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood or Sesame Street or Super Y or any of the programs that we create that help kids learn. Our kids' content is built for small children, preschool. More than half the kids in this country are not in formal preschool, but the other kids have access to a lot of stuff. And so if we want to continue down a path where some kids go into school the first time really prepared and excited about learning with basic skills, and other kids don't, then I think we live with the consequence. Because these are all kids that have great potential, not just in school, but in life. And we want to ensure that that possibility is open to all. And I think that is one of the biggest areas that I'm really concerned about if we can't figure out a way to ensure that we thrive with content that really matters to those kids who most need it.
There's an interesting question here about audience size. Mm-hmm. How do you balance the questioner's asking about educational mission? I'll broaden it to expand it to public mission. You're sort of operating in the public interest. Sometimes operating in the public interest is not the same as having a commercial imperative where the goal is to drive the number of eyeballs. Right. So how do you balance those two?
Yeah, look, we are mass media, so if we have an audience of 2, that isn't exactly meeting our mission. But I do think, so we do pay attention to audience, but it doesn't drive our decisions. And I think that, again, as we look at what we could be doing down the pike, we're constantly thinking about, okay, what isn't being very well covered in other places, and what should we be doing to help us really, like right now, we've always been the home of people like Carl Sagan and Nova and Nature and really important science programming. I think that our many people in our country are not well informed about science, and I think this is a great opportunity for us to do even more in the space and really help us understand both our obligations as stewards of this world, but also basically understanding how science works and what its impact is, and that's for little kids as well as adults.
Yeah. Two questions that I think are related here. One is, should public media treat platforms like TikTok and YouTube as distribution channels? Another person is asking if PBS should invest more in creator-style talent to connect with younger audiences. The idea that somehow PBS should acknowledge that the landscape of distribution and consumption is changing. Should you change with it? Now, of course, I'll stipulate that this is not necessarily an operation whose intent is to reach young people.
But we do.
But you do.
But we do, and in fact, that
I'm not sure your core audience is on TikTok, let's just say.
But it is on
Right.
YouTube. I mean, we created a specific platform on YouTube now a number of years ago that literally gets billions of streams, and it is a place that we began to experiment because we saw a lot of people in the earlier days. By that I mean like 10 years ago, 12 years ago. On YouTube that would have been creating content for us for broadcast. And so it is a great platform to bring in a whole range of creators. And by the way that we look at those platforms is not, well, you can be on YouTube and then you graduate to be on, sort of primetime PBS. They're all important. They're all important in their different ways.
And it may be, Paula, it may be enough to create something, whether at the local level or where have you, that lives on one of these other platforms and never actually appears on a television.
No, a lot of the great content that we're creating doesn't appear on other platforms beyond YouTube. And the thing that's great about those platforms in particular is, one, it brings in an amazing array of talent. The second is that many of our stations are able to really connect in their communities in ways that they haven't been able to do with the work that they've done through broadcast. And then because, again, we're a system, we can bubble up some of the great work that's being done and really not so much put it on broadcast, but really shine a bright light on it. So
Can you give an example of something in that category, something that's happening maybe off screen from most of us at the local level that is an example of what you'd like to see more stations doing?
Yeah, I mean, so we started a series with a local station called Weathered, with a wonderful talent, a meteorologist who is unbelievably compelling. And the thing that's fantastic about it is that also we're not tied to, sort of not only broadcast schedule, but what sort of fits in nice bits that we've usually dealt with. So you can do smaller pieces. Now, she happens to be such an amazing talent. We actually created it into a series. I mean, it's a rare thing that we did. But the series itself that is her core really sits on YouTube, and it's great, and it bubbles up all the time. It's got an enormous audience, and I think is really an example of the kind of thing that PBS should be doing, PBS station should be doing.
Is there, I'm thinking about, again, on my side of the line from a journalism standpoint, I'm thinking about newspapers like the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, which has now gone completely out of print. It's now just a digital paper. Is there a world in which PBS no longer appears on TVs, no longer appears as a station? I mean, it's hard to think about PBS these days, to me, as a television station because the content is available in so many other places. Would there be a benefit to you all redefining as digital only and no longer appearing on television stations?
Well, I mean, we can come back to Arkansas for a minute. I mean, if it was decided by the commission to discontinue that is a PBS station, we could get a digital signal into Arkansas. In fact, they've sort of argued, well, you know, you could get it anywhere. But here's the thing that's still complicated, is Arkansas happens to be a state that is one that has the lowest broadband penetration.
Right.
And so broadcast actually does matter. I mean, there are people, I mean, I think one of the mistakes that a lot of us makes is that you just assume that everyone is consuming content the way that we are.
And they're
individually. And they're not. There are a lot of people that rely on over-the-air television because of geography.
Right.
And also for economics.
Well, in Texas, where of course we are today, 1 out of every 3 rural households does not have access to broadband.
Right.
Right. I mean, the assumption that, don't worry, if everything goes online, it will fix everything is undermined by that fact. And what you're saying is Arkansas and other places that have a high need may not actually be able to access.
And if I was running a commercial organization, maybe I wouldn't care. But I'm not.
But you're not.
I'm running an organization that
Right.
cares about communities and the public. And so for me, that audience is more important. And so that's why we're going to make sure that they receive content.
So here's a spicy question that I think kind of goes in the opposite direction from a lot of the stuff we talked about at the beginning. In an era of polarization, authoritarian pressures, and widespread misinformation, does PBS need to rethink what independence and fairness mean?
I think it is a spicy question, but I think that what we need to do in this moment is dig down even deeper with what has always defined us, which is to report, for the news work that we do, to report the news. We are hoping that people are not drawn to other, places where they're getting information that may or may not be accurate. We're very, very focused on making sure that you have the information that you need. And I also think that, part of what we also need to be doing is to be relentless and not be cowed by pressures that, as was attempted over the weekend, is don't cover the war or cover it in the way that we want you to cover it.
See, I mean, I think I don't know that the questioner is asking this, but I'm sort of saying you could make 2 different points here. One is be less forward with your positions, like you have to don't take a side. The other is absolutely take a side. Like I mean, I wonder if one way to interpret this question is that maybe PBS needs to be much more out front and call BS when BS needs to be called and all that kind of stuff.
Well, that is, I think, what we try to do is to be not shy about the programs that we do and the programs that we bring forward. Yeah. I mean, it's not just how you're covering stories on a day-to-day basis, but it's overall what stories you're bringing forward.
Choice of stories.
And the choice of stories, and I think this is a moment when we have to be even more aggressive in making sure that we're bringing forward the stories that really help people understand, particularly in this moment, how we got here. Where does this come from?
Right. We are just about out of time. Paula, thank you very much for coming today, being with us. We appreciate everything you're doing. Paula Kerger, CEO of PBS. Thank you all very much for coming.
Thank you.